All right, we're going to take a first look at using forms in HTML or web pages. Forms are where they, your website collects data. You've filled out lots of them, entering things. When you buy stuff online or fill out a new user application online, there's some web forms behind the scenes. They've gotten a little bit maybe fancier looking and responsive than what we're going to be doing here. And in fact, this in your assignment is pretty much what I want you to develop. If you look at the exercise, I'd say, just develop what I did as the first time through, but it gives me a vehicle to talk about a lot of the concepts that go into doing web forms, and lets you then practice, in an initial and a starting off way with it. Now, the one thing about forms is they typically collect data, names, select lists, radio buttons. We'll talk about some of these different controls, and then send it off to a server application for processing. So even when you do something simple like put in a username and log in and say, submit or log in or whatever, that goes off somewhere and a server processes it, maybe against a credentials database, and then sends back a response in HTML about what does. Your login worked. Here's the landing page, or the login didn't work. Reset, and that kind of thing. So we don't have in this course the scope for writing web responses. Server side code. We can appreciate that it's there. What we do have in this case is a little bit of code that I wrote on the server. It's got this URL, and all that does is, if you use that as the destination, if it's really called the action in a form, when this form is submitted, everything the form's collected is sent to this, and all this does is show you everything it got. And so what we should see when we do it, and we'll see an example, are what we filled in the form. Now, presumably, the web server wouldn't just say, well, here's what you told me. It would take the information and do something with it. So that part for us just needs to be a black box. But our goal for our forms is to be sure that everything we filled in on the form gets over there by name and value when it comes up. So I'm just saying there's some server action behind the scenes, and we'll just be using this particular application that I use for testing. Did I get the right stuff? But I'm looking then in the HTML that's behind this. We'll kind of come back to it, and it starts off just like regular HTML. Don't forget, a lot of this boilerplate, if you will, that we include in our HTML. And there's a heading, but here we've got the first look at this form attribute. And typically, and for us, the form, the opening part of the tag has some attributes. Action is the action, the place that you want all the information sent. Usually it's like a URL or some application that's going to take that information and do something with it. So action equal, and that's our action. And in our case, we're going to do target equal underscore blank. That means when the response comes back from this, and it just happens to be a request handler written in .NET, when it comes back, it's going to come back in a new window or a new tab. So we don't lose our context, but we can see the results. In fact, I will just even do that much. And when I say submit, there are two. I'm going all the way to just before the end tag for the form, as you have read, in the guidance. So do those tutorials at least. Maybe glance through the chapter. It'll make this go a lot easier, and you'll see what you're doing. But on the form, there are two input types. One is a submit, and that will come up as a button that says submit. And when you click submit, then that action gets taken place, and all the values are passed to it. And if you include it, reset puts all the entry boxes back to whatever their initial value was, or empty, just as, I kind of want to clear the form. So if I click submit now, I get this in a new tab, and this is the result. Here's the list of the params I got, and this is really what we're looking at. The rest of this is stuff that did get sent on our behalf, and we can pretty much ignore that. It's just kind of header sort of stuff. But I see 4 things, but no content. So I see 4 names and no content. So we haven't filled out the form yet completely. So we didn't get much. But I'm just demonstrating that, okay, what I got, if you sent that form, it's pretty much a blank form. I got 4 fields, but no values. Okay, good. But we're going to work on that. Well, let me go ahead and fill out the form and then talk about what's happening. We're used to this. This is called a text box, or just a input type of text. There's a label, right, or a little bit of text that appears on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and hit reset because I want to point out something. So this label is not part of the content, but it helps the user to understand what to what's going in that box. Notice there's sort of the ghosty first name that's in there, and when I start typing, though, that goes away. So that's an effect called placeholder. That is, you can sort of give a hint of what you want them to put it in there. If I submit this form, it's not going to submit last name. That's not really in there. That is just a kind of a reminder of what they should do. Okay, so that's text input with a label. Here we have, I think, just some text that's a paragraph and oh gosh, I'm looking for, is this a select? This is a select list where we get to select one. Notice there's 4 items on the list. Here's the definition. We'll go through that in a little detail, but I've set it up to just show 3 of them for some reason. And you can choose in this list just one car. And so even if I tried to do 2, I can't. So I selected a Saab, but that's a format. I probably should have made it wider. This isn't pretty. And by the way, I'm not too worried about you making this form pretty on this exercise. It could be prettied up pretty easily, and should be if we were doing some kind of survey. We're focusing on, okay, what do these different controls, I call them, or inputs look like, and how do they work? But this select list lets me, well, maybe we'll look at the definition while I'm doing it, and I'll go back to look at this one. But this is the select. You can see that a select ID, or you give an ID to the control, but you also give a name to the control. And usually the ID and the name are the same. It's the name that's going to carry forward to the server. So you want to be sure that your items get names. The label here, choose a car, is, a label is really just text. I put it in a paragraph to give me some spacing around it. Otherwise, it all kind of came up. It's just text, but by doing a 4 equal cars, and I'm trying to highlight it without getting it to IntelliSense me, the 4 equal cars, it matches that cars up with this. So like a screen reader for somebody that's sight disadvantaged, it understands that label goes with this. So if they hover over this, it can, their reader can read out choose a car, whatever our label is. So that label is kind of for accessibility, and it's also a good semantic thing to have in there, in the sense that, okay, that is they're labeling this control that somebody's going to choose. And so the size equal 3 has to do with how many get shown at one time, but the list, and you just have as many option values as you need to get what you want. These are hard coded. There are ways to sort of write code that looks into a database and pulls and makes a list that maybe varies. What items do we have in stock, way beyond our control. Notice that there's a value equal and then the text. So this kind of says when they choose Saab with a capital SAAB, the value that will get sent when they make that selection is SAAB lowercase. So it's almost like select this, and this is what will get sent to the server. So that's kind of the setup for that. I kind of mentioned it but didn't highlight, but it's probably better. I'm going back to, here we are. This is label for fname, and its first name. So like, before, that label matches up to an ID, and so it will understand, the browser will understand that this label is intended to go with this particular text input, where you just write something. The name of that is fname. Again, so the ID and name are almost the same thing. ID is unique and sort of identifies it to the browser. Name is what it gets passed forward as if it goes somewhere else. So that's there. Used, and I'm copying a lot of this right from the W3 Schools examples, but just putting it all together in a form. So BR just says, let's skip a line down after I have the name, and then it skips a space, and then it allows for that input type text. This placeholder equal is where we get that little grayed out first name until we start typing. You could add, if you wanted, a value, like a default value here, that if they didn't change it, would get passed. I'm not going to leave that in. There was a time we had a person coming in for an interview for a professor spot, and their listed first name was FNU. That turned out to be for first name unknown. It was one of these one-named kind of people. So you can assign a value to a text box that's kind of like a default, and the user can then overwrite it. And the W3 Schools had that as part of the example, but to me, we're asking the user for something. We don't want to define a default value for it, though any of these you could have a default value like, it's fiat if they don't choose something else. Lots of little things like that we can do with forms here. We're just going to kind of go on. So that's how this works, and it just, as we can see when it gets rendered, allows on the text a place for them to type something. I think as a default the width is 20, but you can work on widths and that kind of thing. All right, so we talked about this select or select one item, right? I can only select one. The next thing is checkboxes, and this one is something that it's allowing here to check multiple, and we can see how it goes, and they're all kind of just a little different. This is just a paragraph. What vehicles do you have? I put in to have it ask the question, and so notice that as these things share the same, let's see, checkbox, vehicle 1, vehicle 2, vehicle 3. They each have different names and values because these guys really aren't connected. They look sort of connected because I've got them together here on the form and put them together here in the HTML, but I could have these spread out in the form, and if they check this box, vehicle 1, I have a bike is the label, then the value bike will get sent for vehicle 1. We'll see that when it comes in. So a checkbox, these look like it might be one element, sort of like the select element is, but the checkbox is really separate elements, but usually you group them together. Okay, and so there is an example, and as I said in the assignment, if you, I'm not going to give you a copy of the code, but you can sort of copy the code or get it from W3 Schools and work on that. But that does give a checkbox, and I've checked the first and third. This one is a select, but it allows multiple. And here I made the size, how many it shows, equal to how many were in there. The label for sodas, remember the label, the 4 matches up to ID, but the name is going to be, and it's usually the same as the ID, but the name of the thing that gets sent is going to be sodas. But this allows multiple. So if I like Mountain Dew and Sprite, which I don't know if they're my favorites, maybe Dr. Pepper on that list. I'm not a big soda person. But with holding down the control, if I just left click, I get 1. But if I hold down control, I can get 2 or 3. So now it's Mountain Dew and Dr. Pepper. But that's how a multi-select would work. If you want to allow from a predefined list, allow them multiple selections. All right. Good. Showing off a radio. And there's probably 25 altogether of these different inputs, and you've seen them now and again. You might not have known the name, so I just put a paragraph favorite web language. But here are these radio buttons. They're a little like check boxes, but since there's only going to be one, they're sharing the same name of Fav language. The label, this label is for HTML, and so it's got the idea. So here's a case where the ID and the name were different, just because it's going to send Fav language, but it will come in. I don't know what it is, CSS. I'm just selecting something so the form isn't empty. But that's how radio buttons work, and a little like this check boxes, these things are kind of independent. A lot of times you group them together, and since they all have the same name in this case, it's going to only allow you to select one. If we wanted, we could have another set of radio buttons with a different name, and then it would allow you to select from that different one. But here you can only get one done at a time, even if you hold down Control. So that's radio buttons. You've seen them before, but they set up just a little different. Each item separate, more like a checkbox. It takes just a little getting used to, whereas these selects are, here's the select, here's kind of all the selections available. Text area is just what you might think. It's an area for text, rather than like a block. And you can edit, allow some edits, and you can even have code then that does spell checking and formatting and allows uploaded pictures. And we're not going there. So the name of this is going to be the Lang reason. Just because it's so tricky. I don't know why we like CSX. 10 rows, 30 columns, the placeholder, the ghosty text was rationale for choice. There's nothing that goes in, yet it does have a beginning and end tag. Well, I guess you could, if you put something in there, excuse me, that would define the default value for the text area. Again, why put something in if we're asking them the question? It was my take on it, so I just kind of, this is the way to have nothing in there other than the ghosty placeholder before we start. All right. In the best browser, this is going to be something called like a data list. It looks like a text box, but it's happening up here. When you put something in there, I can put something different than is available, but if I want to give, and to see the choices, you got to get cleared out. If you want to give them some predefined kinds of things, you can do that. If as you start typing, note I put F, and I got Firefox and Safari. Now that I do FI, it's shifted down here, but Firefox is the only one fits. So what it does is kind of does a lookup on that list, to help them sort of get a sense of what the choices are, and as they type, it kind of narrows the search down to the choices. So I filled something in for all of these. I'm going to submit. And there it went, and this is the kind of thing that I'm going to want to see as a response kind of from yours, that there's a first name, a last name. There is a single select. I recommend you use the example I did, but the requirement for the assignment says I need a single select. Notice there is the check boxes, and so they checked 2 vehicles. Got that. Notice how the sodas came in. I got both, but like a comma delimited list. They checked Mountain Dew and Dr. Pepper. That was that multi-select. The Fav language, they selected CSS, and now that just kind of comes from this value here. So notice that it's the value on these boxes that kind of is what's sent, and then presumably, as I said, the server would do something good or interesting with this. Right now, all it's doing is passing back, here's what I got, got the Lang reason and got the best browser. So not a lot of drama, but a little bit of work in getting a forum set up, and that's really kind of the basics. And I think, or at least my idea on this exercise is the best way to get started is to kind of write one closely, based on an example, and get it to work. Oh, and at the end of the day, of course, I hope it validates. I think be sure it validates plain text. Should have checked. Bleep. Yay. All right. So, just check that it validates that you kind of closed all the tags and are doing some things. But that's really the once through on forums, and should give you enough to do that first task. And then you have a second task where it comes on. You do something based on what you learned here. So good luck with those forums. Take care.